Supply and demand. It is the basis that pretty much every successful product follows. What the people want, the people get. And that goes for this channel. About a year ago, I made a video on Portal Revolution, a Portal 2 mod that had just come out, and it performed incredibly well. You guys liked it. Thank you. But even beyond that, you asked for more.
Have you played Portal Stories, Mel? Another fantastic entry to the Valve fanon. You should do a vid on Portal, Mel, or at least play it if you haven't. Why does everyone forget about Portal Stories, Mel? You should also do a video about Portal Stories, Mel. To be honest, I consider Portal Stories, Mel, to be the canon one. Play Portal Stories, Mel.
Well, I finally played it, and I've gotta say, even after getting my brain blown up by these egregious puzzles, it was worth it. So, here it is. As much as I don't look forward to diving back into the rabbit hole that is Portal lore, I present to you Portal Stories Mel. If you've watched any of my other videos, you already know the spiel. Before we talk about the actual game, first we're going to take a look at some context pieces, starting with the Steam page itself. Portal Stories Mel, or Portal Mel as I'm going to refer to it from now on, there is a tax on words, is a mod for Portal 2 released in 2015 and developed by Prism Game Studios. The game mainly takes place sometime between Portal 1 and Portal 2 and follows the protagonist of the same name, Portal Mel, just Mel. Little typo in the script there. According to the description, it tells the story of Mel, who meets a new personality core and faces an undiscovered threat to the Aperture facility. Wonder who that might be. Some other details are listed about the mod, such as it featuring 22 levels, custom assets and achievements, but also logic-based puzzles, not execution-based puzzles. This will become more relevant later on, although I have no idea what exactly execution-based means. Lastly, on the Steam page you can see that they also won 2 awards in 2015. The first being the Best Fan Creation at the Game Awards, a pretty huge achievement for gaming considering Bloodborne lost Game of the Year, and the other Best Single Player on ModDB. Now, the game never came out on ModDB like most other Valve mods back then, but it seems it did start its journey there with a couple announcements and teasers. In the end, just like Portal Revolution 9 years later, it would be released on Steam straight away, where it found its instant success. So, with so many awards and such high reviews, such a great fan reception from the Portal community, what did Portal Stories Mel give players that made it such a hit? Well, to find that out, we'll have to go back in time. Not back to 2015, although I wouldn't mind if we could do that, but back to 1952, the early years of Aperture. The first of the 5 chapters in Portal Stories Mel starts off with you in a tram, presumably being taken to the Aperture facility. Looking around, you can clearly tell the car is from the past, built nothing like the cutting-edge technology you'd see in any of the original Portal games. It's even got wood paneling and old-school Aperture Science Innovators posters in pristine condition. Outside, you can also see numerous scientists, all wearing their Aperture lab coats and interacting with various things around the underground tram line. The intro sequence is actually a lot more synonymous with the beginning of a Half-Life game, both of them starting off with Gordon Freeman in a tram car being taken to either Black Mesa or City 17. Meanwhile, both Portal games start with Chell waking up from stasis inside a relaxation vault, not exactly giving us any context as to how we got there. Straight away, it is obvious that the devs took inspiration for this introduction from Half-Life 1, as the tram sequences are pretty much identical. You have the obligatory company propaganda, the empty tram, the various facility workers and activities going on around you. It's almost one-to-one. In fact, the intro sequence from Portal Mel is also the only time that you get to see other people in a Portal game. The closest you could get to seeing a person in either 1 or 2 was by placing your portals in a particular way to see yourself, much like in a mirror, a quantum physics breaking mirror. This tram setting makes a lot of sense for the timeline, over which I went into a lot greater detail in my Portal Revolution video, by the way. To summarize, in case you didn't know, which is probably no one if you're watching this video, Portal and Half-Life take place in the same universe, and respectively Aperture and Black Mesa exist at the same time. In fact, they are in serious competition, as both work in the same industry of research and innovation, both battling for government grants from the US Department of Defense. It would therefore make sense that both facilities would be very similar, even as far as to employ the same transit system. After all, both Aperture Science Innovators and Black Mesa are massive underground complexes, so staff would need a fast way to get around. Already, Portal Stories Mel has done something neither Portal game had done before, which is to provide some context for why we're there. With Chell, it was implied over time that she was a test subject for Aperture technology, but we're never told when or whether she applied voluntarily. Both games take place after the GLaDOS takeover. With Mel, we know when, we know who, and we know why. The only thing we don't know is what will happen. Throughout the first chapter, pre-recorded messages from Cave Johnson, the founder of Aperture Science Innovators, introduce us to the facility and confirm to us that we are in fact a volunteer being brought to Aperture on the tram to take part in a test.
You've been selected from a large group of candidates for a special test in our temporary testing areas.
These messages, voiced by Harry Callahan, do a great job portraying a young Cave Johnson with his charismatic quips and vicious leadership. I mean, less than 5 minutes in, he's already fired someone for misspelling station in his script. Pretty spot on. After the tram journey, you actually also get to see some of the above ground parts of the facility, something you once again don't really get to do in any other Portal game. You even get to see a car driving around, which is pretty awesome. This whole community was, as Cave Johnson explains, custom built to accommodate Aperture workers on site to keep them as close to the complex as possible. As far as I could find, there'd never been any mention of a town built by Cave Johnson, but it is something that would really fall in line with the Aperture we know from the original Portals. Cave Johnson had always exhibited this authoritarian behavior, always wanting as much control over the people under him as possible. Hence, the devs deciding to add this makes a lot of sense, and I think is a great creative choice. It immerses you even more in this period when it seemed like there was no other way for Aperture than up, and the company was skyrocketing. On your way to the test, you eventually take an elevator ride down one of the salt mine shafts. More specifically, shaft number 1, according to a little map in the elevator. Cave Johnson also brings up something about spiral staircases. This sounds exactly like something he would say, so again, the writing so far is really good. At this point, however, I do have to bring up some inconsistencies, because you obviously can't have too much of a good thing. Firstly, we'll start with this mine shaft we're in, shaft number 1. We pretty much know for certain that this introduction takes place in 1952. I mean, even the chapter name is 1952. According to the Half-Life Wiki, the absolute and only source for anything to do with the Half-Life universe, I won't hear anything about it because I can't be bothered to dig any deeper. The first test shaft completed was number 9, and that was in 1953. It would therefore not make a lot of sense for you to be going down shaft number 1. Of course, it's very possible that Aperture Science innovators could have started in shaft number 1, for instance, but finished number 9 first a year later. But in my opinion at least, that's kind of unlikely. In Portal 2, Cave Johnson says that he's employed an unorthodox approach of building up from the bottom of the mines instead of downward from the surface. However, in Portal Mel, during the elevator ride, you can see that enrichment spheres had already been built up to the very top of the shaft, presumably meaning its construction is near completion. Enrichment spheres, by the way, in case you're not familiar, are Aperture's solution to suspending tests in midair, as it would have been the easiest way to make use of the vertical space inside the mine shafts. Again, I could be completely wrong in what I'm saying. It could be entirely irrelevant, and feel free to let me know in the comments if you feel like it is. I'll be glad to read and respond to them. Another small inconsistency is actually to do with the tram ride, at the very start of the chapter. You see, in Portal 2, Cave Johnson explained that volunteers at the time, astronauts, Olympians, and war heroes, would have been transported to the facility with limousines. Considering this takes place in 1952, right at the start of the company's operation, you'd imagine that that's the way Mel would have been brought in. To play devil's advocate again though, there's nothing to tell us that this propaganda by Johnson was in fact the case. He is a deceptive little shit, so it could very well be that it was either just a promotional stunt to get people to volunteer, or didn't apply to every single one, and Mel was unlucky enough to have to take the subway. I do have to add that even if these are in fact inconsistencies, it doesn't mean anything. It for sure doesn't mean the game isn't any good, or doesn't fit in with the Portal storyline. After all, this is a fan-made project. The plot is inherently not canon, so they're free to make any alterations, and I think the ones they've made so far are great. Getting back to the game, after the elevator ride you finally arrive to what you will be testing. The Aperture Science Innovators Short-Term Relaxation Vault. In one of the pre-recorded messages, Cave Johnson also clarifies that the reason you were brought in at night was to gather better results.
But just remember, don't sleep too long. This isn't a bed and breakfast. And if you decide to stay tonight, I'm charging you rent for the next year.
All around the vault, which is located in one of what looks like many container-looking chambers, you can indeed see a number of different screens and machinery, probably used by scientists to take those results. The vault itself is what appears to be an early design of the relaxation vaults we see used in Portal, more specifically the one Chell woke up in at the beginning of Portal 1. Without spoiling too much yet though, there won't be anything short-term or relaxing about this test. The chapter ends with a cutscene of you laying down inside the vault after Cave Johnson confirmed with Carolyn, his secretary, that it was ready. The last thing you see before the screen fades to black is a small monitor above you reading, "Good night." Ultimately, there's not much you can interact with in this chapter. It is more just to set the scene for the rest of the game. But there is quite a bit to explore. As I've said before, the devs did a great job recreating what Aperture would have looked like back then, sprinkling in a lot of small details to keep it authentic. Apart from the various Aperture Science Innovators posters, you can also find portraits of young Cave Johnson and Carolyn, as well as the trophy closet you came across a couple of times in Portal 2, this time expectedly emptier since the company was still in its infancy. One of the only trophies you will see is from 1952, issued by the US Department of Defense for Contractor Runner-Up, a competition that was won by Black Mesa, a trend that would live on for decades, hence Cave Johnson's apathy towards them. Lastly, you do also come across an early model of the turrets, which have been deactivated by Crazy Larry after a few workers were presumably killed by them. Believe it or not, these turrets will play an important role in the story way later on. With that though, that's it for Chapter 1, a very promising start to the rest of the game. However, at this point I was really looking forward to trying out those logic puzzles advertised, and thankfully Chapter 2 definitely delivered. The second chapter, Extended Relaxation, begins with you waking up from your sleep, and looking around you can tell something bad has happened. The room you were in earlier is now broken and in disarray. There's debris all over and the portrait of Cave Johnson is crooked. One thing that is intact, however, is a clock on the wall, which reads 11:32 and 35 seconds. Taking a look at the clock during the final moments of the cutscene at the end of Chapter 1, we can see it read about 11:34 and 45 seconds. Although if you pay close attention, it also doesn't seem to be working. Of course, that is probably not intentional and just a limitation of the game engine, but if we assume it was working then and wouldn't be now, because whatever caused all this damage to the room would probably have also broken it, it would have to have been at least 12 hours after you fell asleep. Either way, this will soon become irrelevant, because definitely more, a lot more than 12 hours have lapsed since. As you get up, the voice of Cave Johnson, a very different sounding Cave Johnson, comes back on the speakers to inform you that something had happened with the test.
Slight problem with the test. Don't worry though, we got shot okay.
The door then opens and you're free to leave the chamber. As is probably obvious straight away, the entire place is in complete shambles. The level of damage is almost indescribable. Once again, clearly something catastrophic has occurred, and probably not an earthquake as Fake Johnson is trying to make you believe. Going back to the cutscene, just before cutting to the second chapter, you could see and hear some alarms blaring through the darkness. Now, based on our knowledge of the biggest incidents at Aperture, in my opinion this could have been one of two incidents. The first would be GLaDOS filling the Enrichment Centre with neurotoxin, the event that eradicated pretty much the whole human population of Aperture before the events of Portal 1. The second would be the destruction of the Enrichment Centre, which, spoilers, is the ending of Portal 1. What you'll notice straight away is that I am referring to two events that occurred way after the 1950s. That is because, as we go on with the game, you'll very soon realize we are not in the 50s anymore. One of the first things you'll have to do in this chapter is jump down from a considerable height. Normally, you probably wouldn't do that in real life. Matter of fact, I very strongly advise you not to do that. Don't do it. However, Mel can do it because, as it turns out, she'd been previously equipped with Aperture Science long fall boots. Looking past how that would have happened, the next thing will be picking up the obligatory portal gun. It is a portal game, after all. Now, this is not the Aperture Science portable quantum tunneling device of the early 50s. It is in fact, as we can also tell by the poster behind it, the Aperture handheld portal device, advertised alongside the 60s-70s Aperture branding. Look, I realize at this point, if you don't already know where I'm going with this is all probably extremely confusing. What is 1970s Aperture? What does the naming of a device have to do with anything? Where can I like the video? Well, the simplest answer is down below, where you can also subscribe, which I'd appreciate very much. But otherwise, all you need to know at this point is that a lot of time has already passed, based on what we can see so far, at least around 2 decades, but later on evidently a whole lot longer. This fake Johnson is trying to explain it all away by time ripples, but I think you can all probably tell something is fishy. Making your way through the collapsed building, you'll see the newer Aperture logos again, plastered on top of the old Aperture Science Innovators branding, alongside their 1970s motto of "Where the science is theoretical, but your $60 is fact." The slogan refers to the $60 scheme launched by Aperture in the 70s to recruit more volunteers, targeting the homeless and desperate especially. Essentially, Aperture ended up under federal investigation due to the disappearance of a number of astronauts. So they had to resort to lower ranks of society, offering them $60 as compensation for their contributions. Needless to say, not a very moral thing to do. What the presence of this branding here means, though, is that this part of the facility was active, at least up until the 70s. This means that Mel, who was supposed to go in for short-term relaxation, was either carelessly or intentionally abandoned here. It couldn't have been an accident where they had to leave her behind, because people were still working in those offices for decades to follow. After portaling and slinging yourself around, you'll eventually reach a large vault seal, and to open it, you have to solve the first real puzzle of the game, flipping 2 switches at the same time. However, another key detail in this area is a subway system schedule, which this time is dated July 16th, 1974. This is either the last time the subway system was in operation, or the last time people were here at all. One piece of technology here that is going to be a rock star in most puzzles from now on is the Emancipation Grill, a mechanic taken from the original Portals but adapted and built up on. That is because in Portal Mel there are 3 types of Emancipation Grills. The most original and most common one is the blue one, the one that doesn't let any objects, such as cubes, pass through and also prevents and erases any placed portals when the player walks through. The second is the one you find here, the red one. This one does the same things the blue one does, except it also kills the player if they try to pass through it. The third type is more of a laser grid type. It is essentially the opposite of the blue Emancipation Grid, in that it lets cubes and portals be placed through it, but if the player tries to pass it, they die. As I said, you'll pretty much always find one or more of these Emancipation Grid types in any puzzle, making them probably the most iconic mechanic of the game. On the other side of the seal, as Fake Johnson lets you know, is the first testing track of the mod, which makes use primarily of the 2 types of gel, repulsion and propulsion. These are taken straight out of Portal 2, there's not really much to talk about, apart from the fact that propulsion gel was actually only invented in the 70s, something which John's doesn't even try to explain anymore. Now, I'm not going to go through every single puzzle and explain it because that would be a nightmare and would probably take longer than if you just played the game yourself. Which, by the way, great idea. You should definitely do that if you haven't already. However, I do want to talk about this second puzzle in the track for a second, because it is pretty interesting. What you essentially have is two cube dispensers. One which you can operate with a button, and the other you have to use the first to activate. There is also an emancipation grill, a blue one, which covers the button for the second dispenser, and which you can turn off by standing on a third button. However, this button simultaneously operates the elevator to the exit. So what you have to do is use the second cube to operate the elevator, and when the first cube triggers the second dispenser, it will respawn it, causing the elevator to go up. One thing to note is that this entire time the first cube will be going through a respawning cycle as it gets destroyed either in the emancipation grill or the water below. Lastly, to open the exit, you will have to replace one of the portals to bring the first cube up to you using momentum, so that you can use it to push the final button. Can you tell why I don't want to do this for every single puzzle? In my opinion, this style of puzzle is very different to what you would find in the original games, and it's the type you'll encounter the most playing through Portal Mel. The simplest way I can explain it is that it gets you to think laterally as opposed to in steps. Most Portal puzzles you can solve by passing individual hurdles, while in Portal Mel, you solve the entire puzzle in one specific way. To be clear, it's very likely that I'm completely wrong and an actually smart person could explain it a whole lot better than I did. But at least this is what I discovered in my playthroughs of the game, and potentially demonstrates what the developers meant by logic-based puzzles, not execution-based. At some point while solving these puzzles, Fake Johnson will finally reveal that he's been lying to you.
I'll be blunt now. I'm not Cave Johnson. This isn't the 1950s.
Virgil is in fact yet another personality sphere, which seemed to drive the plot for most Portal games at this point. If you didn't already know, personality cores, or spheres, are cores developed by Aperture Science to contain artificial intelligence meant to carry out various functions. They appeared for the first time in Portal 1 during the GLaDOS boss fight, where you had to break them off and incinerate them in order to defeat her. And the reason they're called what they are is because each one would have a different personality. Sort of like the characters in Inside Out. God, did I really just reference a Pixar movie? They appeared again in Portal 2, with one of the main characters in that game being Wheatley, an intelligence dampening sphere who essentially kicks off the events of that game. Much like Whitley in Portal 2 and eventually Sterling and Conley in Portal Revolution, Virgil plays the role of guide for Mel throughout the game, at times taking control of the facility to unblock previously blocked paths, as well as stave off any imminent threats. I do have to add here that it is very apparent that Portal Revolution did take some inspiration from Portal Mel with the introduction of Sterling, as the way the two cores are introduced in each game is very similar. Both pretend to be someone they're not, and both lie about the reason you're carrying out the tests. As a matter of fact, even later in the game, when you rescue Virgil from the rubble, it is very similar to your discovery of Conley in the battles of Aperture in Portal Revolution. I'm not saying that Revolution shouldn't have done this, or were lazy in their writing and just copy-pasted from Portal Mel. Not at all. I think they drew some good inspiration from it and did a great job writing their own dynamics with the personality cores. All I'm trying to do is point out the similarities, mostly because it explains to me at least why so many people reacted to my Portal Revolution video by recommending this game. After a puzzle where you have to outrun a bunch of turrets, you'll come up to the first roadblock of the game, a bunker door that ends up being jammed. This causes Virgil to crash out, later apologizing and giving us some more information about our protagonist Mel.
Yeah, I have that information from you at the 1936 Nuremberg Olympics. You should have gotten that silver medal.
This sounds like very specific information, directly calling out real events that occurred in the past. The 1936 Olympics were a real installment of the Summer Olympics, albeit a pretty controversial one for reasons you can probably imagine since they were held in Germany. However, the trail goes cold when you find out that the games were actually hosted in Berlin, not Nuremberg as Virgil calls out. Now, one of the candidate cities for the 1936 Olympics was Nuremberg, but ultimately this means that the events Portal Mel refers to are fictional, perhaps an alternate history for the Portal timeline. Mel is therefore more likely than not still a fictional character, and after some research I couldn't really find any information to prove otherwise. What I did find though is that Mel was apparently the cancelled protagonist of Portal 2, and consequently also a cancelled character for Portal 2 Co-op, which ended up making use of Peabody and Atlas instead, two androids built with the purpose of testing. In my opinion, it was a very good idea from Prism Game Studios to make use of her, as she fits in very well with the unique spin on 1950s Aperture. I'm sure it was also a nice callback for all the Portal heads back in 2015. During one of the final tests of Chapter 2, the first imminent threat of the game pops up.
No vital signs detected. Initiating flooding procedure.
This Aegis thing is something we'll talk more about later on, but it will end up being a major force throughout the game. At this point, it just raised the stakes for your escape, as it's essentially put a timer on you for getting out of this section of the facility alive. It's not a real timer, by the way. Plot armor is a hell of a thing. Running through a series of destroyed offices will eventually take you to the final objective of this chapter. Another transition seal up to the section of the facility where Virgil is. This escape sequence is actually designed pretty well. Even though you're not really on a timer, which would kill you if it ran out, like say the end of Resident Evil 2, Virgil's frantic voice lines and the explosions happening all around you do make the situation feel more urgent, and so does the backing track. Up to this point I haven't at all referred to the game's dedicated soundtrack, but it has been playing for the entirety of the video, and as you could probably agree, it is very good. It was composed by Harry Callahan, who also voices a couple of characters in Portal Mel, most notably Cave Johnson and Aegis. According to IMDb, Callahan apparently also worked on Portal the Underground and Meet the Cores back in 2011, among other non-Portal related projects. I think it's therefore fair to say he was pretty passionate about Portal, and it definitely shows in this soundtrack. Overall, Chapter 2 did a great job introducing the types of puzzles that Portal Mel will throw at you, as well as further setting up the dynamic and the hook for the rest of the game. However, a lot is still left uncertain about what Virgil's escape plan really is or what this new Aegis thing stands for. The third chapter of Portal Stories Mel is called The Ascent, and for good reason too, as it follows the same trope set out by Portal 2, the progression back up to the surface. In both Portal 2 and Revolution, one way or another you ended up at the bottom of Aperture, and through solving puzzles made your way back. I guess it makes sense when you think that all of these tracks were built in vertical mine shafts, but nevertheless, it's becoming a pattern. The first region of this chapter is, as Virgil refers to it, the junkyard, a wide expanse of burning debris and the place where you finally rescue him. He's thrown on top of a pile of rubble inside some abandoned offices, and to proceed you'll have to turn on the power so that you can reinstate him on a management rail. This does, however, once again trigger Aegis, which activates yet another security protocol. At this point you might be wondering, how is it that Virgil can operate so many functions of the facility given he's kind of sitting in rubbish? After all, even at the end of chapter 2, he tells you that he'd close the seal behind you to prevent the flooding posing any further threat. Apart from that, he's constantly unlocking doors and activating elevators, but he's not connected to anything. Well, while I'd love to discuss with you guys how I think he could be doing it, he outright tells us himself.
Wi-Fi. I'm fully Wi-Fi capable.
I'll be honest, I kind of feel like this is a cop-out answer, and a bit shoehorned too. I'm pretty sure Wi-Fi was never referred to in any of the original Portal games, and even as a unique mechanic, it does feel out of place for it to be used to operate such critical systems in the facility, especially the old abandoned parts. Don't get me wrong, as I've said before, I love it when developers take the freedom to creatively alter the source material, but this one, it does feel a bit half-baked. Now, if instead you found Virgil, say, hooked up to some machine he'd been put in charge of in order to manage the old sections of Aperture, then I think that would make sense. At least that's how I would have done it if I was trying to set this up, but what do I know? Either way, I personally think this part could have been elaborated on a little bit more. When Aegis activated that security protocol, it also carried out a scan of the facility, which returned 3 unregistered life forms, 1 biological and 2 mechanical. For now, we can assume that Mel is probably the biological one and Virgil one of the mechanical. But what could possibly be the second? Even later on, when Virgil gains access to information about Aegis, he can't identify what it is. In fact, that's something that is only revealed at the end of the game, so buckle up. Before moving on with this section, you can also explore some of the side offices and find a couple neat details. One of the more significant ones is a corporate poster about the Borealis, the most elusive and ambiguous boat in gaming history. The poster is accompanied by a notice reading that all applications have been postponed indefinitely. It is therefore likely that this part of the facility was abandoned only after the Borealis incident, sometime in the 70s. As difficult as it may be, I will briefly explain what the Borealis actually is, both because some people genuinely might not know the greatest mystery in the Half-Life universe, and because it gives fans palpitations whenever they hear the name. Bought at some point in the 70s by Aperture Science, the Borealis was a boat intended to be used for research, but in classic Aperture fashion suddenly disappeared in some sort of teleportation accident. Despite the company never finding it again, it did become somewhat of an achievement, as it was a formidable step in the development of their portal technology, a ground that they were fiercely battling Black Mesa on. While the boat was mentioned in Portal 2, where you could also find part of the remaining dry dock, it first featured in Half-Life 2 Episode 2, where it was a major objective in the Resistance's fight against the Combine. Sadly, Valve never got to expand on the Borealis, because they decided to focus on making money, hence why it's become the greatest mystery it now is. Anyway, I just wanted to point it out because I do like it when these small details are included in a fan game, just to tie it all in. It makes Portal Mel feel a lot more like a spin-off entry than a fan-made mod. The next section of the game, and most of the rest of the chapter, takes place in Virgil's test track, a part of Aperture that's a lot more akin to Portal 1 or the later parts of Portal 2. The puzzle chambers here are modern and in pristine condition. Virgil even tests some of the systems to make sure they all still work, calling out one new mechanic you'll see a lot in the next few levels: the excursion funnel. Appearing for the first time in Portal 2, the Aperture Science Excursion Funnel is essentially a holographic tube that floats the player and objects to and from its source, depending what mode it's in. Using portals, the funnel can also be redirected, providing pretty much the main mechanic of solving puzzles with it. Much like the Emancipation Grills, the excursion funnels are a main staple of Portal Mel puzzles, especially those in Virgil's track. However, the developers did come up with a lot of unique ways of using them, meaning despite their recurrence, no two puzzles will feel the same. Another two mechanics which make their appearance early in this section are the Aperture Science Hardlight Bridge and the Thermal Discouragement Beam. The former is pretty much just a bridge, and using portals you can position it to create a platform to walk over. The latter is a laser, which can either be used to deal damage to the player or turrets, or activate specific terminals to operate other systems. Both of them are taken out of Portal 2 and their operation is pretty straightforward. The laser does actually also tie in with another mechanic that will be introduced soon, that being the weighted pivot cube. This can work as a regular cube, and in many Portal Mel puzzles you will use it as one, but its primary function is being able to capture and redirect the discouragement beam. These are basically all of the mechanics you'll come across in the puzzles throughout this chapter, and if you've played Portal 2 before, you at least won't have to learn them brand new. That's a good thing, because Portal Mel does not hold your hand at all, and definitely assumes you've already got the hang of them. While you're making your way through the test chambers of this track, there will actually be an ongoing struggle between Virgil and Aegis, a constant tug of war over the control of the levels. This is once again because Aegis considers everything that is going on a threat, acting as a sort of burglar alarm which trips every time it detects motion in certain parts of the facility. Eventually, Virgil does successfully flood some of the servers, allowing him to take back control and guide you onward, but also discover some more information about Aegis.
It looks to be a security mainframe, trying to protect the scientists logged into its system.
Ultimately, Virgil's plan is to bring you closer to the surface, where he hopes the overgrown flora will interfere with Aegis's tracking. He does this by taking you out of his test track and onto the under construction parts of the Enrichment Centre, turning the whole dynamic into a cat and mouse game, with Aegis desperately trying to intercept you. At some point, it will send up a trap elevator that you can obviously avoid by going outside of the elevator shaft. But what's the fun in that? If you instead step into the elevator, Virgil will have a meltdown, and Aegis will lower it into an incineration pit, a sequence that is actually very similar to the way GLaDOS tries to kill you in Portal 1. Oh yeah, spoilers, by the way. Either way, I thought this was a nice little detail. The last puzzle at the end of the chapter is a particularly unique test chamber. It is actually a puzzle that Virgil explains is going through quality control, meaning you'll be forced to solve it 3 times in order to actually pass it, essentially playing the role of a playtester. The special mechanic about it is that each time you solve it, the puzzle changes, introducing stuff like turrets and lasers to make it more difficult. I think it's a neat concept and a great spin on the way Wheatley would alter chambers in the final parts of Portal 2, providing a little more insight into how Aperture would actually prepare the test chambers. And that wraps up Chapter 3 of Portal Stories Mel, an overall balanced portion of the game which provides a great deal of puzzle variety and content as well as some exposition and story progression. It also, I think, did a great job bringing you back to the Portal 2 Enrichment Centre, wrapping up the journey from the very beginning of Aperture to the present day. However, there is still a whole lot left to go. Organic Complications is the name of the 4th chapter of the game, and it takes place entirely in the overgrown sections of the Aperture Enrichment Centre. As Virgil iterates, this portion of the facility was abandoned after the neurotoxin incident, an occurrence prior to the events of Portal 1 when, after finally being booted up, GLaDOS gained sentience and decided to kill every scientist in the Enrichment Centre. At the beginning of the chapter, Virgil will also attempt to hack into the main computer, prompting a sequence of him trying to guess the password and failing repeatedly. Now, a button labeled Admin Override does activate during this whole encounter, and you are free to press it in order to get the computer to work, but you don't have to. He finally tells you that he's going to continue working on the computer and that you should get back to testing. Your objective is finding a way to get rid of Aegis, which is once again trying to flood the Enrichment Centre. Virgil also informs you that he won't be able to accompany you anymore because the management tracks are destroyed. The main reason for why these chambers are so dilapidated in comparison to the rest of the facility is actually alluded to by Virgil, who mentions her being destroyed by a certain test subject. I think it's fair to say you can probably guess what this is referring to. At the end of Portal 1, after Chun's final battle against GLaDOS, the entire chamber housing her explodes, scattering debris all over the surface. As you can see in Portal 2, the extent of the damage is immense, essentially erasing that entire section of the facility. Furthermore, since GLaDOS was in charge of maintaining the Enrichment Centre, the rest of the systems were left to rot and decay, leading to what you can now see in Portal Mel. It is ultimately a great way of contextualizing the game, as it establishes it in the timeline relative to this grand canon event. One thing to note at this point though is that while the explosion may have severely fragmented GLaDOS, it did not eradicate her. After all, she does make a return in Portal 2. This means that, since Portal Mel takes place between the two, at this time GLaDOS is still a threat, still alive. God, I felt so badass saying that. At some point during your progress through the puzzles, Virgil will come up with a plan to take on Aegis.
Did you know you can increase the size of your core in just 2 easy steps?
Sorry, that's the wrong voice line. Why did I leave that in? This plan to essentially disable the turrets is actually very similar to what Wheatley instructed Chun to do to fight back against GLaDOS in Portal 2. In that game, you used a faulty turret to override the approved turret template so that when GLaDOS eventually tried to kill you, she didn't have any turrets to do it with. However, in Portal Mel, the actual progress is quite a bit different, but I'll talk more about it when we actually get to it. Eventually, you will come up to a test which Virgil says is broken, signifying the end of the testing track as well as effectively the last chamber you'll have to solve. However, it is in fact possible to solve this chamber, and the reason I found that out is definitely not because I wasn't paying attention when he said that. If you discover the workaround and do it the right way, you can actually open the exit door and go through it as usual, but unfortunately the way is blocked by collapsed debris. You do, however, get an achievement for it, called Determined, and depicting a crowbar. What's that doing there? Anyway, if you go the right way instead, you'll once again end up on the maintenance catwalks of the facility, going through a weighted cube testing section. In the offices up ahead, you'll come across yet another interesting poster with lore implications. Moon rocks are the future. Ironically enough, they were the end of Cave Johnson. Back in 1982, when Cave Johnson was still the acting director of Aperture Science, but more importantly, alive, the company purchased a great deal of moon rocks which they discovered worked perfectly with their developing portal technology. This moon rock, purchased despite the company facing bankruptcy, is essentially all of the white paint that you shoot your portals onto, but more specifically the basis of conversion gel, the third and final gel type developed by Aperture. Coincidentally, conversion gel doesn't make any appearance in Portal Mel. In fact, as far as I recall, apart from this poster, there is no other reference to moon rocks at all, in spite of them being introduced in Portal 2. However, what we did learn in that game is that these lunar rocks actually had the side effect of carrying a fatal disease, one which infected Cave Johnson and ultimately led to his demise. Once again, I talked a bit more extensively about this in my video on Portal Revolution, so if you want more of a deep dive into Portal lore, you could give that a watch. I would really appreciate it if you did. What's important to know for now though is that this whole moon rock malarkey technically led to the GLaDOS takeover and where we are now. Finally making your way through the end of the weighted cube production line, you will get to the Aegis Core access entry and the end of Chapter 4. While guiding you through the dark, Virgil will explain that he was in fact the one who woke you up, as you probably could have guessed by now, and thanks you for helping him. This is exactly the type of heartfelt speech you'd expect before a final boss fight, isn't it? Every Portal game ends in a boss fight. Portal 1 was destroying GLaDOS. Portal 2 was taking down Wheatley. In Portal Stories Mel, it is eliminating Aegis. However, what is different about Portal Mel is the way you do it. In Portal 1, you fought GLaDOS by using the rockets she was using to kill you to knock off her essential personality cores, after which you incinerated them to slowly chisel away at her integrity. In Portal 2, you fought Wheatley in pretty much the same way, except now you were lobbing bombs at him from different angles until finally you could channel the strength of the moon. In Portal Mel, the fight is actually a lot more complicated. The final stage is very similar. You have the obligatory countdown to your death, the turrets trying to kill you, the janky mechanics, but the actual way you do it and the lead up to the end is fairly different. Aegis has a multitude of security measures set up specifically to prevent anyone from messing with it. As Virgil informs you, first you'll have to disable all of these systems so that you can directly access the core. Turning on the two generators in the most convoluted way Aperture could have devised, while also taking cover from the hail of turret fire, will unlock the security doors. This will lead you to your second task, disabling Aegis's main security systems. Sort of like Wheatley towards the end of Portal 2, Aegis will be moving portions of puzzles in order to try to hinder you. These will come along with turrets, and you'll have to find a mock puzzle solution to get rid of them and traverse the catwalks. Apart from being a great callback, this section also gives the fight that much more gravitas, showing you the power Aegis has over the facility and the threat you're up against. After you've turned off the security system, the last task you have to complete before taking Aegis head-on is replacing the turrets. That's because after you disabled the other measures, it redirected all its power to turret production, attempting to form an army as a final stand against your attack. Now, despite Virgil's initial plan, Mel can't actually affect the turret production. But what you can do is recalibrate their targeting system, basically making it so that they won't shoot you, but shoot something else. Perhaps something of Aegis's. In actuality, the only thing you can replace is the original template with a server bank cardboard cutout. You can probably see where this is going. With all of that now done, you can finally approach the Aegis core. On your way though, you actually also pass the exit elevator, which Virgil lets you know, once Aegis has been taken down, will be your way out. Currently, it is blocked off by a red emancipation grill, so you couldn't cower out of the fight even if you wanted to.
Alright, Mel, this is it. This is Aegis's server room. Get ready for this. It won't give up without a fight.
That is Aegis, the Aperture employee, guardian, and intrusion system. The thing that has been trying to kill you this entire time, flooding the mine shafts, activating turrets, your final target standing in your way to freedom. The turrets you've just overridden are what carry this boss fight against Aegis, as they are your sole means of destroying the servers. The water Virgil redirected before already damaged a great deal of them, but it is up to you to take out the rest. Thankfully, Aegis is initially unaware of the turret override, so it provides you with an endless supply of them. Pretty soon though, it does catch up to what's happening and starts dispatching the older turrets, the ones that weren't linked to the general system. These ones will attack you, and you'll have to take them out as you usually would while the other turrets shoot the servers. However, these turrets aren't the only threat to your life either. As I said before, it wouldn't be a Portal game without a timer, and Aegis provides just that with the draining of oxygen from the offices. It is a proper fight. Between managing Aegis's turrets, moving yours to destroy its servers, all the while feeling the pressure of the ticking clock, it makes for a good battle, and it all culminates in the destruction of the final server.
Error. Automated server control failing. All non-vital systems terminating. Power redirecting to manual control. User input required. Voice control deactivating in 3, 2, 1.
That is it. Aegis has lost. All that remains is for you to jump on in, manually shut it off, and leave the facility. One last thing this cutscene does reveal though is the answer to the game's longest running question. What was the third target Aegis scanned? The one other thing it considered a threat to the facility and its albeit dead employees. Well, it was It ultimately doesn't matter what Portal game you play, it seems. Valve did a great job to provide the community with one all-encompassing antagonist that will always be the main threat. Be it in 2007 when Portal first came out, 2013 when Portal 2 brought us back, Portal Revolution in 2024, and now Portal Stories Mel in 2015, all of the action essentially takes place because of one common enemy. Even in the titles where she doesn't play a main role, in these fan games where she doesn't even make an appearance, GLaDOS is always the looming threat. One last thing to remember though is that Portal Mel does take place between Portal 1 and Portal 2, and it knows that. Before the screen fades to black and the game comes to an end, it shows us the Aegis terminal one last time, and a screen that reads, Waking Test Subject 001, Subject C redacted. The very beginning of Portal 2. I started this video off by mentioning supply and demand, and to be honest, I was only planning to use it as a hook to drive viewer engagement, but I've since come to realize that it actually relates to Portal Stories Mel pretty damn well. It is a great game. The puzzles are masterfully crafted, the environments look incredible, and the writing is stellar. Sure, it's got its tropes and its fair share of predictable plot twists, but to be fair, what story doesn't? Either way, at the end of the day, what Portal Mel did incredibly well enough to get it nominated and awarded at the Game Awards, was built on the already existing masterpiece that was Portal 2. Just like Half-Life, Valve managed to earn Portal this die-hard audience, and it did so by creating this intricate plot and fitting it into an equally intricate world. Ultimately, Valve did as Valve does best and made us always want more. Hence, the demand. Even 10 years later, the thirst for more Portal, for more Half-Life has spawned these great fan games like Entropy Zero and Portal Revolution. Prism Game Studios, clearly passionate about this source material, supplied us with a game that quenches that thirst. Portal Mel actually makes you feel, at least it made me feel, like I was playing yet another installment in the Portal franchise, with the iconic characters and locations, but also unique novelties. It is no wonder to me that with all this serious work, it achieved the grand reputation it did. Sadly, Prism Game Studios hasn't created much in recent years. The last thing they released on Steam, and the last concrete thing I could link to them, was a standalone project that didn't really gain any traction back in 2018. If this is the same company as I could find on the gov.uk website, Prism Game Studios Limited actually dissolved in 2021, making it unlikely we'll ever see anything else from them again. One fun fact I did come across though while researching the team behind Portal Mel is that a couple of them also worked on Cry of Fear. Ian V's, the lead writer of Stories Mel, is one of the voice actors in Cry of Fear, and so is Stig Sitongen, who voices Virgil. I just wanted to bring it up because obviously Cry of Fear is another one of those Half-Life mods of all time, and it goes to show exactly how passionate these people were about Valve's universe. Again, I couldn't find any solid information on it, but I can only hope that they're still spending their passion and talent on other successful things that maybe we don't know about. Before wrapping everything up on Portal Stories Mel though, there is something I haven't mentioned yet, and it actually has to do with the difficulty of the game. You remember how I talked about how many of the puzzles might have driven me up the wall? Well, that was only in the story mode of the game. Believe it or not, Portal Stories Mel actually comes with a difficulty setting, and there is one other, even harder, advanced mode, which I did complete. Now, I may or may not have solved all of them legitimately. I'm sure my YouTube history would definitely reflect that, but they were absolutely more difficult. Unfortunately, you don't really get anything for finishing the game on Advanced. I was kind of hoping you'd get some bonus dialogue or post-credits scene. You do get a Steam achievement though, just to let everybody know you indeed hate yourself. And that pretty much wraps up everything on Portal Stories Mel. Thank you very much for watching this video to the end. It means a lot, it really does mean a lot. I hope you enjoyed. I hope, it entertained you. Maybe you knew about this mod already, right? And none of this is new to you. Maybe you knew everything in it, but if you didn't, I hope it let you know of some stuff about this great mod, Portal Stories Mel, sorry, I got way too used to saying the abbreviation. If you didn't know about the mod, check it out. I don't know why you wouldn't have at this point. It's been 10 years. And this mod is great, so you really have been missing out. But either way, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it entertained you. And look, let me know. Let me know in the comments if there's anything I missed. I'd be glad to read it over. If you have any ideas that I didn't think about or I didn't cover in the video, that's what the comments are for. And, let me know what you thought about the video. Let me know if you liked it. Personally, I think this is probably the best version of these types of videos that I've made so far. I'm very proud of it. I've sort of advanced everything, I think. From the graphics to the audio, I don't know. Maybe it was complete shit. Let me know, right? Obviously, I'll be biased. But, yeah, I like making it. Again, I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I hope it was worth the wait. I hope it delivered. If you haven't seen any other of my videos, then feel free to check them out. I'd really appreciate it. Let me know what you thought. While you're here, obviously, hashtag sell out a little bit. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It would mean a lot. Leave a like on the video. If you want to check my Twitch channel as well, I guess I'll go full sell out here. I do stream on Twitch from time to time, a little less regularly now. But look, if you want to go check me out on there, if you're like, hey, what is this guy like off script, then, check that out, I guess. But, yeah, I guess that's as many shoutouts as I can do in this short time span that I have on Earth. I'm recording this at like 10 at night the day before uploading this, so look, it's rough, alright? Cut me some slack. I think at least the script in the video was a little bit better, so, you know, let this one slide. But yeah, thank you very much for watching it. I really appreciate it. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Again, any feedback on this would be greatly appreciated. But other than that, I guess I'll see you in the next one. And yeah, guess that's it. Have a good one. Take care.